Hello and welcome to another LinkedIn Live with me, Garth Sharif. I'm excited to be back on my regular time slot, Tuesday. I feel like this is becoming like NBC Thursday in the 90s with Seinfeld, Friends. Remember that lineup in the 90s, if you remember that. Again, I'm not comparing myself to that awesome lineup of shows from the 90s. I'm just saying I'm been consistent over the last 5 weeks, but I'm glad you could join me. For those that are here, welcome on this Tuesday morning. I have a certain order I'm going to go through this weekday update, but I have to say that I do live in the city of Toronto. Toronto, if we go full enunciation, but for Torontonians, it's Toronto. We just kind of just blend all the consonants together. Toronto. And the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, that's later on because I do have a sports update. But whew, the city, it's a good time to take transit. People are much happier today, more polite. It's not that the city is not polite, but it can be a little cold, just like any big city. But today, everybody is feeling warm and gracious, even if the weather is not outside, because the Leafs did their thing last night, which they normally don't. When I say that they do their thing in this city, it's generally a negative connotation. So I'm glad you can join me today for this weekday update. Now I took inspiration for this. Now you probably are going to see this and think, boy, this person Garth must have majored in graphic design. And you could definitely say this is an amazing work that you've done, taking the SNL weekend host Colin Jost and Michael Shea, and just doing a little bit of nuanced graphic design to make this weekday update. And thank you for those that are on. If you want to let me know what you think of my graphic design ability, please do. But this is a weekday update. I thought, there's a few things that are happening, and I thought rather than just going to one particular subject, we'll talk about a few. And I do have a few things to talk about, and we'll touch on each of these today. Of course, generative AI. We have to say something about generative AI, Chat GPT, and other generative AI news. And there's one interesting item that happened last week. There's more than one, but the one that I'm going to raise, goes into the LinkedIn Live that I had just last week about the intellectual property problem of generative AI. But again, sometimes problems also open themselves up to interesting solutions and collaborations. It's not just all negative, but maybe there's creativity out of the problems that generative AI creates with artists. So that's item number one on weekday update with Garth Sharif. Of course, another area that I speak a lot to, the hybrid workspace. Interesting article that came out in the New York Times, I believe on Monday, or maybe last or late last week. I'm going to bring that up. New research on what we might miss from the hybrid workplace, what we get. But again, nothing too earth shattering, but research based. Maybe functionalizes or captures what we all feel. And then we'll do a little sports update that I've already foreshadowed. Again, I'm not Sports Center. That would be cool. I do love sports, so it'd be great to be up here and go, hey, on the top of the hour, let's talk about the this team, that team, or this player, that player. But we'll just do a very specific sports update. Then we'll just talk about what's new with Sharif Consulting. Just give you some updates on our end and what's happening with us, and that's the way we'll go through this Tuesday LinkedIn Live with me, Garth Sharif. All right, so let's get into the first piece of this, which is generative AI. Again, there's so many places to talk about generative AI, um, good, bad, what's happening. But I mean, foundationally, this is really transformative stuff. I mean, the things that are possible with uh, generative AI is getting interesting, getting slightly, let's say, I don't want to use the word scary, but also um, a little bit. what do we do with all this? What are not only FOMO, which I talked about last week, fear of missing out, but also, what does this mean? What are the implications? Because there's just every week there's something that somebody is using generative AI, or we think they're using generative AI for, in a way that we're like, oof, what's the lines here? It's blurred lines. It's getting challenging. Again, I'm not against generative AI. I think generative AI is going to open a lot of possibilities, especially for professionals. I like the technology. I see the problems when it comes to arts and creativity, and also when it comes to professional judgment. But they're not insurmountable. But as we're right now, sort of right into this phase of ChatGPT being used and kind of in our faces, we do ask questions about where is this line. So here's an article from Justin Charity of The Ringer. And if you are into music or not into music, you may be aware Drake and The Weeknd. This is not a Toronto centric show today, because I did maybe allude to the Toronto Maple Leafs. But, the Drake and The Weeknd are from the six, Toronto, right? And they're fairly popular outside of Toronto. I like The Weeknd, I like Drake, but maybe there's a home bias there. But I think we can say, internationally they're fairly well regarded. But this article goes into um, a song that was released on TikTok by Ghost Writer, and it was called "Heart of My Sleeve." And if you're a fan of The Weeknd and Drake, which I believe only collaborated once, and here's the article. Drake was featured on Live For, even though they're both from the Six in Toronto. They only collaborated once. If you listen to this song and you didn't know otherwise, you would think, wow, Drake and The Weeknd came back to collaborate. That's amazing. But it wasn't Drake. It wasn't The Weeknd collaborating. It was a potentially, now we don't know for sure, but looks to be some sort of generative AI uh, use of their voices to create a song. And Justin Charity is a fan. He's a music writer. He's very knowledgeable. So I'll leave his opinion as the leader here. He thought the song was very passable, like it could be The Weeknd and and Drake. And even though there are some issues with maybe the lyrical flow and all whatnot, it's pretty passable. And this goes into questions about artists again, and what happens when this is starting to move into creativity. And again, also the source of the idea, the creativity for this is not coming from human inspiration. It's coming from the data that it has, the generative AI, and figuring out new ways of piecing those together in a unique way. And again, this comes into a philosophical question: is art sort of a unique, sort of spontaneous sort of creation of the human mind, or are we taking things that already exist and sort of remodulating them into something new and interesting? It's challenging. So I think Universal Music and those that are the agents and the music team behind Drake and The Weeknd are trying to obviously bury this song, because they don't want this song to be mistaken for a Drake and Weeknd collaboration. But poof, interesting stuff here, because what does this mean when we start talking about music that we can't differentiate from the actual artist? Do the artists get paid? What do the artists see now? Justin Charity's article, I'll link these articles. I'll put these articles on LinkedIn. Also goes into the idea that, just like me, that even though this is somewhat concerning for artists and what it means for intellectual property and the things that you can definitely see as threat, there's always a place for artists to work with this technology to figure out how to work together in a way that's collaborative and creative. But poof, I mean, that's next level. I mean, Drake and Weekend song. If you heard it and I listened to it, you'd be like, "That's a new." I mean, I'm not deep into Drake. I'm not deep into The Weeknd. I mean, I'll listen to The Weeknd. I have The Weeknd on Spotify. A few Drake songs. I actually like Drake's last album on my Spotify. But yeah, I'm not like into it so much that I could say, oh, that's not The Weeknd and Drake collaborating. I don't know the history. They're from the sixth. The sound song, the voices sound good enough to me. And again, this is not about professional judgment. This is not an accounting or auditing issue where I have to go, let me dig into this. If music drops on whatever platform that you're on, I don't think our brains are into at this point yet going, is that a real song or is that created together? Because before we wouldn't have to ask ourselves that question. We'd be able to say, I can listen to that and I go, that's not a song from Taylor Swift or from Drake or from Harry Styles or whatever, whoever whoever your music tastes are. Only one of those were my music tastes, I would say. But so I think now we have to say, interesting. Now, is our brains have to be reprogrammed when we see new art, new trailers, some synopsis for a book? Do we have to ask, is that the author? Is that real? Ugh, obviously it gets more into like a place where we start to question things, and it's good to question things, but when we question facts too much, we sometimes go into a spiral. So good and bad, but part of the weekend update. So we're going to go into the next part of the weekend update. So that was generative AI brought to you by Sharif Consulting. The next one, I'll share my screen is on the hybrid workspace. And I always like to remind us in the workspace that we are still relatively new in the hybrid workspace. We are still gathering data as how people are doing with this. And so we can be somewhat anecdotal or intuitive and say, this is working, this isn't working. But there are researchers out there kind of looking at the data and saying, what is actually happening? And there's a lot of good things that have happened from the hybrid workspace in terms of flexibility and in EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion. Um, and we can look to that. And I'm a big fan of the hybrid workspace, and especially for what it's done for me, in being able to do what I do at home and not have to travel as much so I can be with my family. But one of the drawbacks has always been around less supervision. That day-to-day supervision isn't there as much. And what is the consequence of that? So this is, one of the first major studies on remote work showing the hidden penalty of flexibility, right? And this is by Emma Goldberg and Ben Castleman. I'll put this link out there. Great article from the New York Times. What it does, it gives some stories around this. But the economist Natalia Emmanuel, Emma Harrington, and Amanda Ballas, they went into this and studied engineers at a large technology company. And if you read the article, you might say, well, of course, this is what they would find as the major findings. But there was still a sense that you could supervise synchronously and asynchronously via Zoom or Teams or whatever platform that you're using. And there would be some trade-off, but the flexibility to less supervision was okay. But they are finding that person-to-person connection for learning purposes, feedback purposes, can't is not has not been replaced by Zoom and Teams. That's just not they can't replicate the ability to be in person, have the interaction that allows us to learn sort of at the deeper levels and also get more immediate feedback. And that's just not something that they mentioned Slack, Zoom, whatever method of communication that you have within your company amongst your teammates and managers, that just isn't something that's happening. And it kind of goes back to, this is a quote from the article. It's what my what grandparents have been saying for a long time. Miss Emanuel, an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, said in an interview this month, face-to-face meetings are very different from FaceTime. So again, it's not a black mark on remote working saying, okay, well, remote working done. We should all come back in the office because supervision is less effective. It's a question of how to make supervision more effective. Maybe that is an argument for having a few days in the office together, and having some sort of combination of work at home, work from the office. But since I work in the learning side, I'm deliver professional education and professional development. Obviously, this is an interesting space for me to say, how do people learn? And again, it doesn't mean that you can't learn from Zoom or Teams or Slack. It just means that we haven't found the best way to do it in a way that might replace in-person communication. And this is something that we kind of understand. I am actually starting to do more in-person trainings and in the classroom work, still doing a lot of stuff over Zoom and Teams. But that's something that's a sentiment out there. Again, doesn't, I think, take away from all of the valuable things that happen with working at home, and also the tools that we allow for interaction with each other asynchronously, and also for those that work on a different sort of learning style. Zoom and Teams are very good, but kind of crystallizes maybe what we sometimes feel, especially as managers and partners, that it's easier to teach and provide feedback in person. It's still, though, something that we should learn, right? Sometimes we think we're in person, we'll just do feedback and teach the way we've always been teaching. Feedback was a problem before the pandemic in terms of how people were providing feedback, how often, and how much they prepared for giving feedback to somebody. So that's still a challenge today. It doesn't just mean coming in back in the office and all of a sudden feedback is perfect and everyone's just getting the best type of learning for their learning style. No, no, you still have to work at these, still have to work at it. But it's interesting to maybe provide a little bit more quantitative data over something. A lot of those that lead others and teach others feel like it's harder to teach and provide feedback. But again, that's a problem that we might be aware of, but it can be solved, and maybe even solved by the hybrid space, some of the tools in that space as well. All right. So there we go. We've gone through generative AI. We've talked about the hybrid workspace on our weekday. Let me just show you this graphic again. I'm sure some of you on LinkedIn will be just, it'd be like, please show me this graphic. Let me get back to it so that you can again behold my amazing graphic design skills. So here we go. I'm gonna share it with you. Just see what's being shared. Oh, that's not the right window, but anyway, weekend update. Colin Jost, Michael Shea. That's what I did there. And we talked about generative AI. We talked about hybrid workspace. Let's talk about some sports just quickly. I'm not Sports Center. But boy, the Toronto Maple Leafs. I am a so-so hockey fan, which is an interesting thing to be here. I lived in Canada my whole life, and being in Toronto most of my life. That I'm a basketball guy. I've always been a basketball guy, probably because I can't skate, even though that is on my to-do list of things to learn. I started to to try to do that this winter, become a better skater. I wouldn't mind playing hockey. It's a very Canadian thing to do. So it might be a long process, but I'm also learning about a lot of things as someone who delivers learning content. So, I'm trying to come to appreciate hockey because it is an amazing sport. It's just has all the elements of other sports, but on skates and on ice, right? But the Toronto Maple Leafs down 4-1 in the third period, 3 goals, win in overtime. The city is jubilant. It's excited. It's euphoric. I want to do sort of the who's the announcer at the Knicks that does all the alliterations. I'll get his name, but it's just a lot of descriptions to describe to say how happy the city is. So hey, for the Leafs fans, maybe, and the Knicks fans. So the Knicks and Leafs represent sort of the capitals of their sport, so to speak. The Maple Leafs represent sort of the capital of hockey, and I know that's maybe for those that are outside in other parts of Canada, the Flames, the Oilers, and the Canucks and the Jets and the Canadians. Sure, they might have some disagreement here, but generally we consider the Maple Leafs and Toronto to be like that's the hockey market and the big place for hockey. And then for basketball, it's New York, and it's New York City, it's Madison Square Gardens, it's the New York Knicks. And it is interesting to me that both these teams are up 3-1, right? These two teams and their absolutely sad history over the last 40, 50 years, maybe less for the Knicks. I think they did win the title in the 70s. But it's been not good. Not good for both these franchises, and they represent the sport in many ways. And they're having a moment. So good on them. I'm excited. That's my sports update, and also that Aaron Rodgers joined the Jets. That's big news. Okay, that's enough sports. The last thing I want to talk about before I end the LinkedIn Live today. So we did the sports, generative AI, hybrid workspace sports, Sharif Consulting. What's new at Sharif Consulting? What's going on? For those that are in the know. So, our as an entrepreneur, I'm going to reshare my screen here. And one of the things, as a small business entrepreneur too, one of the things we struggle with is, how do we communicate with scale as a small business? How do we get the message across? And our website, LinkedIn, those are key things for us. My website has been evolving to get a little bit more scale, do a little bit more things, but in that there have been growing pains along the way, and so we're trying to troubleshoot that, and hopefully things are better off. But I've said this before on a LinkedIn post. My site kind of works in two places. There's a sort of a geo target that transforms the website, whether you're viewing it from Canada and the rest of the world, and whether you're viewing it from the US. The reason is there's different requirements for continuing professional development for CPAs in Canada than it is for the US. And I'm licensed in the US to provide certain types of CPE, as it's called, continuing professional education. So I wanted to use the same web address and have the site just you know, represent itself in the area that it was being looked at. And that theoretically was a good idea. I still think it's a good idea, but it sometimes poses some troubleshooting. So we're still working on some things as we go through. But when we talk about events that are upcoming. If you go to the events page, either in Canada or the US, if you're in Canada, you'll see this page. If you're in the US, you'll see a similar page, but it'll be written a little bit differently to meet the requirements of CPE. We have some free webinars, and in Canada, these free webinars are doing pretty well in terms of number of people who will be attending. I think the first two, they're about 60 people going to the audit and assurance update, which is on May 9th upcoming. And I think for the blockchain one, there's about 60. There's also, if you're in the US and you go to the US page, you'll see the same title, but different time and a different description for CPE credit. This will count as CPD credit in Canada and CPE credit in the US for the US one. So if you have a chance to go and sign up for that, that'd be great. And for the US CPAs, you'll also get a credit for a free on-demand course that qualifies for CPE. So that's there. And again, we're working through. I appreciated it. Somebody did send me a message that they were having some struggles signing up for the webinar, and that was on our end. And we're still, small business. Always appreciate the feedback. And not that I'm saying as a small business, mistakes are just part of it. But it can sometimes be a challenge when you're trying to scale up a little bit, and you run into some technology. But I have a great team that I work with, and they've been amazing. And Brittany Dean, who's my virtual admin assistant, and Michael, who has been my web designer. He's been amazing. So great team. And hopefully you can join me on some of those dates for the free webinars. All right, we have come to an end for the weekday update. I might explore a particular topic with a little bit more depth next week, but yeah, I thought this was an interesting way to go. And if you're in the city of Toronto, enjoy the day. This is probably the happiest the city has been in a long time. The mood of the city sometimes is connected to how the Toronto Maple Leafs play. And if you're going outside, it's probably a pretty happy day. It's like a Mr. Rogers neighborhood type day. I want you to enjoy it. So thanks for watching today. For those that were here, I'll post those links onto the LinkedIn post on remote working from the New York Times article and the AI programs from the Ringer. And until the next time, hopefully next week on Tuesday, we'll see you then. Take care, everyone.